Parker Ports and Vinny Minicello, who are here to kind of give you a little bit of, I don't want to call it alternative, integrative, and they're going to explain to you exactly what all that means. So, welcome.
So welcome everybody here tonight. Glad to see you all here. The topic today, moving forward, exploring the circle of health, we're going to get very familiar with this circle. And so I hope everybody has a sheet of paper in front of them that has this circle on it. We'll be working on this piece of paper in a little bit here. If you don't have the paper, raise your hand and Nancy can get you one. Okay. And so we'll start with just some brief introductions. My name is Vinny Minicello. I'm one of the integrative family docs at the UW Health Arboretum Clinic. I also practice doing integrative health consults at the Research Park Clinic. I completed my family medicine residency here a few years ago, and then an integrative health fellowship just about a year and a half ago. My interests in particular are mindfulness practice, as well as acupuncture. And maybe one thing I wanted to share, just one thing that brings a smile to my face is seeing my daughter. She's 15 months old now, taking her first steps and seeing her navigate those. So.
Great, thank you for having us. I'm Parker Hertz. I am, like Dr. Minicello, am an integrative family physician. I'm just a couple of years behind him in training, so I am wrapping up my integrative health fellowship. Like Dr. Minicello, I practice at the Arboretum Family Medicine Clinic, and then have and then also at the Research Park Integrative Health Consult Clinic. My particular interests within integrative health are particularly manual medicine, so things like osteopathic manual therapy, musculoskeletal medicine, and mind-body medicine. I guess as long as we're talking about kids, I've got 3 of them at home, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-month-old. She's working on having regular bowel movements right now.
Thank you. Okay. So I thought we'd begin with just some definitions here. So we mentioned already that we practice integrative medicine or integrative health. And so what does this mean? What does this term actually mean? And so this is a definition that's put forward by the Academic Consortium for Integrative Medicine and Health. And there are a few key components that I'd just like to highlight as a way of introducing what we're talking about. So integrative medicine and health reaffirms the importance of the relationship between the practitioner and patient, focuses on the whole person, is informed by evidence, and makes use of all appropriate therapeutic and lifestyle approaches, healthcare professionals and disciplines to achieve optimal health and healing. So a few key highlights here. First, it reaffirms the importance of the relationship between practitioner and patient, and I think this is really central. Recognizing that it is within the relationship that develops that healing can arise. So that's an important component of how we practice. 2, focuses on the whole person. And as a family doc, this is kind of naturally part of our training, and this is something that's re-emphasized again here with integrative health, is that we look at the person in their entirety, right? So not just what's going on with their body, what's going on with their family, what's going on in the community that's affecting them. All of these factors play an important role in our health, and so we take a look at all of them. Is informed by evidence. And so this is really important too. What we're going to be sharing with you tonight has a lot of research behind it. There's a lot of research that backs the things that we're going to be talking about. And that is important. And then finally, makes use of all appropriate therapeutic and lifestyle approaches, healthcare professionals, and disciplines to to achieve optimal health and healing. Two things about this. One, using all appropriate approaches. So this is where we start looking at how do we bring in things like acupuncture or herbal medicine, or Parker was mentioning osteopathic manual therapy. So different practices that you wouldn't typically, that we didn't learn, actually, just to be honest, that we didn't learn about in medical school. So different practices. And finally, to achieve optimal health and healing. The idea isn't necessarily that the things that we practice will fix, right? It's not that we try acupuncture and it's going to be a magic cure for everything. However, these practices, when applied appropriately, will help us to achieve this sort of optimal health and healing, whatever that might look like for us in our lives. So the next part we're going to talk about is this whole health model. And this is where this circle comes in that's in front of you. So we're very fortunate here at UW Integrative Health Program to have a subcontract with the VA, the Veteran Affairs Hospital System nationally. And so the VA is looking to really transform their culture, transform how medicine is delivered, how medicine is practiced. And so they partnered with us, recognizing that we have many years of experience with integrative health, and said, hey, how can we bring some of these therapies, how can we bring some of these ways of practicing into the VA? And so since 2011, our department has been working with the VA on a national level to develop a very thorough curriculum, very thorough really network of people to help to inform the VA hospital system how to implement some of this work. And so this is the model that we've been using as a framework. And we're going to be walking through each step of this model throughout the evening tonight. And there are a few components. As you see, there are kind of concentric circles within this. So the very center is the me, right? And we're going to be talking about the fact that this is you, right? This isn't your doctor, this isn't another family member, this isn't anybody else, this is just you, right in the middle. And how is it that we can connect with potentially what's at our core, right? What gives us a sense of meaning and what gives us a sense of purpose in our lives. So we'll explore that a little bit tonight. The next concentric circle we talk about is mindful awareness. And we'll have an opportunity to explore what is mindfulness, what does it look like, how do we practice it, how do we learn more about it, and how it informs our decisions about our health and our healthcare. The next concentric circle is the light green color. The green color is called self-care. And there are 8 different areas of self-care, areas of whole health, and we'll be exploring that. The next one is a dark blue circle. It's for professional care. And we'll just touch on this very briefly tonight. Really, the emphasis in a lot of the work that we do is in the self-care areas. The professional care is how do you bring in all sorts of healthcare providers and professionals to support you in your health, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. And then finally, the light blue circle around everything is community. And this is recognizing, you know, honestly, what's happening here tonight, right? And this is the community. And so how is it that community can support each other, right? How can we support the community? How can the community support us in our health as well? And all of these things added up together equal what we call whole health. And so before we dive into the kind of meat of the presentation here, just want to do a few terminology explanations here. So first one, alternative medicine. Alternative medicine was a term that was developed in the 1970s or so. And the intention with this term, alternative, is that it is instead of. So for example, somebody goes to the doctor, and they probably actually wouldn't even go to the doctor. They'd say, no, I don't want to see the doctor. I only want to see the naturopath, or I only want to see the acupuncturist for my care. So basically, not doing anything related to what we would call conventional or Western medicine. Over time, the term complementary came into play, complementary and alternative medicine. So complementary, the way kind of to visualize this or understand this is that it's sort of this parallel path. So yeah, okay, I'll take my blood pressure medicines, I'll take my diabetes medicines, and I'll try some acupuncture on the side. There's not really any communication between the two. They're both happening, but there's not really any connection there. And then finally, we talk about this term integrative medicine. More recently, the term integrative health is what's used nationally. And the idea is in the word, right? This sort of weaving of these different ways of healing, right? We're using the term tonight, whole health. Essentially, whole health is integrative medicine and integrative health. It's a term that was coined specifically for the work that is being done within the VA hospital system. And at the end of the day, alternative medicine, complementary, integrative, whole health, at the end of the day, what are we really talking about? It's just really good medicine, right? Whatever therapy we use, whatever professional we work with, whatever self-care activities we do, all of it is there to support us, right? It's just simply good medicine. And so that brings us to the very center of the circle, this me part. And so we're going to have an opportunity now with Dr. Hertz to explore how do we center our meaning and purpose in our life? How do we explore that? How do we center that as an important part of our health?
All right, so to start out, I know we said we were going to be talking about purpose, but I guess I'm going to start by having you imagine a drug, a medication, that adds years to your life, reduces the risk of heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, helps you relax and sleep better, and doubles your chances of staying drug and alcohol free after treatment. That sounds pretty good, right? It's a drug that also activates your natural killer cells, part of your immune system, reduces inflammation, increases your good cholesterol, and helps repair your DNA. So I'm curious, what do you think this might be? Mindfulness? That's great, yeah. Other ideas? Exercise.
Outlook on life.
Yeah. So I think all of those are playing into where we're going with this. And the answer is purpose. So having purpose, having meaning and purpose, really has a pretty profound physiologic impact on the way that our bodies are functioning, the way that our bodies work. And by purpose, I mean what matters to you. Just to elaborate a little bit further, having a purpose reduces one's risk of dying, and it contributes to good health as much as some other things like quitting tobacco use, having a healthy diet, avoiding inactivity and stress. This is a book called Life on Purpose that delves into how living for what matters most can change everything, can change your health. I just wanted to talk a little bit about an Alzheimer's study that looked at 900 seniors who were followed for 7 years. They had those who had a low purpose in life were 2.4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than those in the high purpose group. Some other benefits of having purpose. So folks with purpose tend to do better physiologically in terms of their health and socially. They report having better sex. They're less likely to be depressed. They get better sleep, and they're more relaxed. some of these we talked about a little bit already. So better immune system to fight off viruses and cancerous cells, reduced inflammation, better cholesterol. So exploring meaning and purpose. This is really foundational to that whole health model, to those circles. And it's because what you define as your purpose or your meaning, what matters to you, is really what drives the whole production. What matters to you, what you want your health for, is the reason that we're doing this whole thing. It's the sort of why for everything else that comes next. So I'd like to invite you to consider what really matters to you in your life, and what do you want your health for. And for some people, this might be something that you think about on a daily basis, or a weekly basis, and for others, this might be a little bit of a new question. And so, while some of you might have an answer on the tip of your tongue, for those of you who don't, I'd invite you to spend some more time exploring it. Know that you don't necessarily need to come up with a clear answer right now, tonight. But some of the questions you can ask or consider as you're exploring this, and continue to reassess as you go throughout life, are what brings you a sense of joy and happiness. Describe one of your lifelong dreams. How does your current health impact what's most important to you? And what's your vision of your best possible health? Some other questions to consider. How would your life or health change if you focused on this in your life? What would you be doing? What would be different? How would you feel? So as we go through the rest of the presentation tonight, I think this is something to keep in mind and reflect on. Not only in what that purpose might be or how you might define it, but how you might use some of the techniques and ideas that we described to better support you pursuing that purpose or that meaning in your life. I'll hand this back over to Dr. Minikio.
Okay. So mindful awareness. Question, who's here has heard of mindfulness? Okay, most people. Who has practiced mindfulness? Excellent, excellent. And I'm just curious, has anybody learned or practiced mindfulness with the UW Health Group in particular? People? Okay, all right, awesome, great.
Are you familiar with that mindful publication subscription magazine?
Yes. Yeah, the journal, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. Thank you. And, seeing how much practice, and there are some people that maybe have not heard of this who have not practiced before, so we'll provide some context. For those of you that have practiced, or have learned about this, I really encourage you to share with the group, right? I mean, I think one of the things when we come with a group this big, there's so much inherent wisdom in all of you from your life experiences. I really encourage that, bring that forth. So we'll start with a little bit of a video here, just to introduce mindfulness.
You may have heard this word mindfulness become something of a buzz phrase of late. So I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this would be. Just as an example, driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, "Who's chasing me?" But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
So that was a video that's put together by Dan Harris. He was a news anchor that was introduced to mindfulness, and now has an app, he has a book, it's called 10% Happier. He has several videos like this, which I think really do a great, just simple way of introducing what is mindfulness. Okay? So I would like to invite people to maybe do a short practice together. Some of you have practiced before, great. Some of you have never practiced before, that's also great. Wherever you're at, seeing if it's possible for this upcoming practice, and again, this will be very brief, probably 2 or 3 minutes at most. We'll see what comes up for you now, in this moment. Even if you practiced for 50 years, what's happening now? So for this practice, I'd actually encourage people perhaps to sit, just kind of sit up in your chairs as best as you can. If you're able to, kind of putting the feet on the ground. And again, recognizing that with mindfulness practice, you don't necessarily need to be in this position all the time to do a mindfulness practice. I'd just like to encourage people, this is one way to sit. And so we'll begin by simply noticing the sense of support that our bodies have by our chair, by the floor. And maybe seeing if it's possible to settle into that sense of support, maybe even just 5% more. And notice what happens in the body as we just settle into that feeling of being supported just a little bit more. Maybe here noticing the breath, noticing it right now. Is the breath shallow? Is it deep? Is it smooth? Is it jagged? And again, the intention with this practice isn't that the breath or the sensations are any particular way. It's just simply noting, what is it like right now for me? And now allowing the attention to be drawn into the feet, both feet. And noting here, what are the sensations that are present? Are the feet moist? Are they dry? Are they cool? Are they warm? Is there no particular sensation at all in the feet? Is there a sort of numbness in the feet? And whatever your experience, just noting how it is. And you might notice thoughts that are arising, thoughts about what's happening before or after. Maybe noticing sounds inside the room or outside the room that kind of draw the attention away. And when you recognize these thoughts or you hear these sounds, kindly, gently, allowing the attention to be drawn back into the feet. And with the next exhale, now allowing the attention to be drawn into the belly. And as best as possible, sensing what's happening here. And perhaps noting the movement of the belly in and out with the breath. Again, here maybe noting if the breath feels shallow or deeper here. Maybe you notice a sense of stretching with the breath. Maybe there's even a quality of hunger or feeling full that's present in the belly. And finally, with the next exhale, allowing the attention to be drawn up into the head. And here, maybe noticing in the face, maybe noticing the forehead. Is there tension in the forehead or the eyes? Maybe noting what the jaw is feeling like right now. Is it clenched or is it loose? And similar, maybe around the back of the head, noticing a looseness or a tightness. Perhaps there's even a feeling of feeling tired right now. And as best as possible, if you notice that sensation of being tired, just see what does tired feel like. What am I noticing? What is the sensations that I feel when I'm tired? And then finally, allowing the attention to be drawn into the body in its entirety, from the tips of the toes to the top of the head. Kind of recognizing that our body functions as one. And perhaps recognizing that connectivity. And if your eyes were closed, you may go ahead and open them. If your gaze was lowered, maybe raising your gaze. And I'd just like to pose the question, and feel free to just kind of shout out, and even just a word or a phrase. What did you notice with this practice? What did you notice with this practice?
Relax.
Relax, yep. Peace. Sleepy, yep. Sleep, yeah, actual sleep, yes. Very good, thank you. Other noticings? Calmness, yeah. Awareness, yeah. Did anybody notice anything particularly unpleasant? Yeah. Backache, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Hard to concentrate.
Hard to concentrate? Yeah, the thoughts kind of going, yeah. Yep. Okay. So question for you, just a follow-up on that. How is this way of paying attention, perhaps different than how we normally pay attention? to our bodies in particular?
Stress, less stress,
No, maybe less stress with this, yeah,
more relaxation.
more relaxation, thank you. Yeah.
Focused, more focused.
More focused, okay, yep,
Not much thinking.
not as much thinking.
Less reactive.
Less reactive. Thank you. Great. And so you notice with this practice, there's a myriad of experiences, right? And they could be pleasant, they could be unpleasant. And what's interesting about this, and this is like, this always gets me a little bit, right? As a kind of conventional medicine trained doctor, you know, my initial instinct when I hear somebody say, oh, this practice, I noticed my back pain. My initial instinct is, oh, what can I do to help your back? What can I do to fix your back, right? And the intention with this practice is to observe the pain, or observe the uncomfort, or observe the relaxedness, or observe the peace. And that's it. Don't need to do anything with it in particular, just being with it. And here's really what we're getting at. So this is a quote by Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning. He writes, between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Okay, and so this is what we're training here. This is what we're training with mindfulness. The recognition of this space between stimulus and how we respond to that stimulus. And recognizing that it is in recognizing that space, we have options. We have different ways that we could respond. And that response, in turn, could potentially lead to what he refers to as growth or freedom. And I'd just like to follow this up with another quote. This is by Dr. Adam Reinfleisch, who's the medical director of Integrative Health here at UW. And he writes, mindful awareness is an opportunity to be in the wholeness of life, including suffering, joy, peace, unrest, creativity, fullness, emptiness, everything. He says, it is not merely a technique for coping with a specific problem. And that last part I think is important, right? So there's a lot of research on mindfulness, and we won't go into all the details of the research tonight. There's a ton of research, mindfulness helping chronic pain, helping with depression, helping with anxiety. The key is that the mindfulness isn't a patch, it's not a band-aid, it's not like a pill. The key is that mindfulness provides us an opportunity to see that space, that relationship that we have with the pain, or the relationship that we have with the depression or anxiety, and then shift how we respond to that, right? And that's really that mechanism of action that we're getting at with mindfulness. And so how does this relate to what we're talking about tonight with this circle? Mindful awareness is the way in which we learn to relate to these different aspects of our health, right? So in a second, Dr. Hertz is going to come up and be talking about the areas of self-care, these 8 areas of self-care. Mindful awareness is the first step in recognizing what is my relationship to how I eat? What is my relationship to how I move my body? And seeing, is this healthy? Is this something that is supportive for me? Or is there perhaps an opportunity for change? Okay. Before we go into that, I want to offer, let's see. Let's just do a very brief practice. And what we're going to do is we're going to go around the circle and just bringing our attention to each of these areas. And I'm just going to read them out loud. If you want to close your eyes, that's great. If you want to keep them open, that's okay too. And so kind of dropping into that place that we were just practicing from, right? kind of noticing the sense of support in our chairs, noticing the sensation of our feet on the ground if it's possible to sense that. And beginning by just calling to mind this working the body piece, right? This is one of the first circles. And even as I say those words, what comes up for you with regard to working the body? What is my relationship to physical activity? What is my relationship to movement? Noticing, oh, this feels good. This does not feel good. There's frustration there. There's sadness there. Just noticing what's present. And then allowing the attention to rest on surroundings, right? Both our physical and our emotional surroundings. What are those like right now? And just this moment, right now in our life, what are our surroundings like? At home, at work. Is there a sense of safety, or is there a sense of ease there? And then allowing the attention then to rest on personal development. And so this is where we talk about personal life and work life. Again, just recognizing here, in my personal life, what's coming up for me right now? What am I working with right now? What is my relationship like with my personal life? And similarly, for my work life, where is that at? Is it something that I want to bring more attention to, or maybe bring less attention to? And then bringing attention now to food and drink, right? And diet, how we eat. What is my relationship with food? Do I eat a lot? Do I maybe not eat enough? Do I have a voice in the back of my head saying, oh, I need to eat more vegetables? What is there? And then allowing the attention now to come to recharge. So this is sleep and refresh. What is my sleep like? Right? And that might be a loaded question. Does it feel enough? Does it feel healthy? Is that a source of support, or maybe is that a source of frustration for me right now? Now bringing attention to family, friends, and coworkers, our relationships in our life. What are my relationships like right now? Am I close with my family and friends, coworkers? Am I distant from them? And how does that feel? Maybe is that distance healthy at this point in my life? Or maybe is there a desire to be a little bit closer? Bringing attention now to spirit and soul. So this is growing, connecting. So this for some people could be, what is my relationship with my faith or my religion? It could be, what is my relationship with the things that are meaningful in my life? Is there a sense of connection or disconnection there? And then finally, allowing the attention to settle onto the power of the mind. This is relaxing and healing. And so, right now in my life, what am I doing to support this power of the mind? Is there a meditation practice in my life right now? Or do I practice guided imagery? What do I do to relax? And maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's nothing there in particular. But just recognizing where things are at with this. Okay. All right, and if your eyes are closed, feel free to open them now. And so I'd encourage everybody to flip over the paper with the circle on it, flip over to the back side of it. And we're going to take not very much time. We don't have a whole lot of time tonight, but let's take a good 5 to 6 minutes. If you're able to. If you can write, great. If you just want to think about it, that's great too. The top question is there in the back. And it walks you through each of these areas of whole health that we just talked about. And you kind of rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, where I am right now and where I'd like to be in the future. Okay? All right. We'll just do a couple minutes here.
How was that? And maybe just one or two words or some brief thoughts. Feel free to throw out some ideas about what that experience was like completing that health inventory. Is it eye-opening? Thank you.
Sad.
Sad. Sad. Thanks for sharing that.
Glad.
Glad? Sorry. What was that?
Glad. Yes, you really like.
Glad. Thank you. All right. Uprooted and unanchored. Yeah. Thank you. So moving into the self-care section now, which is really the biggest portion on this circle of health, this biggest green portion. A few points to keep in mind as we go through these different categories. First, I think that the points of mindfulness that Dr. Minichiello emphasized are really important to keep in mind here too in this practice. That we want to do this with as a way of paying attention on purpose, and especially without judgment. The goal is not to be is not for this to be a sort of exercise in self-loathing for the things that we aren't doing that we wish we were, or as an exercise in really feeling overly confident about the things that we are doing. I mean, I think if it's an opportunity for you to feel a sense of pride or a sense of help, that's fantastic. But if not, I think taking this as an opportunity to recognize where you are and to recognize where you are and make intentional steps to change that is a sort of healthier way to approach this. Also keep in mind that incremental change is the most possible and the most sustainable. So I think it's great to set goals or set ideals for where you'd like to be in a few years from now, but know that that's not necessarily the best next step in improving whatever area of the circle that we're talking about. So starting with the first one here, working your body, movement, exercise, flexibility. So this is another question. What if there was one prescription that could prevent and treat dozens of diseases, such as diabetes, hypertension or high blood pressure, obesity? If there were, well, there is exercise as that prescription. Unfortunately, it takes a little bit more effort than taking a pill. But some of the benefits of exercise are summarized here. So it's associated with lower all-cause mortality rates. So people who exercise regularly are less likely to die from any cause. Increases lifespan. It helps prevent and reduce the risk associated with cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity. It mitigates some of the negative effects of aging. It helps reduce the risk of dementia. It enhances executive function, things like attention, processing speed, memory. It decreases the symptoms of depression and anxiety. It improves physiologic well-being and promotes brain cell growth. So, fitness, how long, what activities? So, recommendations from the major guideline forming bodies are that we all get at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per day. And moderate intensity means where you're working to a point of kind of breaking a sweat, and might be short of breath to the point where you couldn't sing, but you'd be able to hold a conversation. Now that's ideal, but most of us in the United States definitely aren't meeting that. Most of us aren't necessarily even close to that. And any incremental change towards more physical activity can be helpful, and if you feel like that's an area where you need improvement. With this, I always recommend starting with something that feels really attainable. Something like, for someone who's not doing any sort of intentional physical activity, something like walking down to the corner of their block and back, and building that into a regular routine, where you're doing that once a day for a week. Do that for a couple of weeks until it becomes so rote that it doesn't feel like it's taking any effort. And then expand that so that you're walking around the block. And you can think of how that might apply to different phases in the progression, depending on where you are, and depending on what feels like it's within your physical needs. Yeah? Sure, so the question is, I'm describing exercise and fitness, but what I'm describing seems to fall into the category of aerobic activity. And so I'm getting, aren't there other types of exercise, other types of fitness? Yes, absolutely. So, so this recommendation is specifically focusing on aerobic activity, but things like strength training and working on flexibility are also very valuable and are also generally recommended. So having at least 1 or 2 times a week where you're working on strength training or flexibility is really beneficial for things like bone density, reducing the risk of falls, things like that. I'll just touch briefly on one form of physical activity, Tai Chi, which among the different sorts of physical activity regimens maybe has some of the most research on it. You can see the long list of benefits there. I won't take the time to read them all out loud, but you can skim the list. Moving on to surroundings, physical and emotional. I want to touch on another point about the approach to this. There are some things on this circle that might come up that we can't change. There are some aspects of our surroundings that we can't necessarily change. Especially in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of political turmoil in the nation, and there are certain things that we can do about that, like vote or become politically active. But there are certain things within politics that we can't change, at least not individually and not immediately. And that stands true for multiple aspects of our surroundings. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the quote that Vinny had up about between stimulus and response, there's space. His experience leading up to that was actually in a concentration camp as a Jew in Germany. And through that experience, he found his opportunities for freedom. For freedom through the sort of mindful way that he approached that. And so if ever there's a situation in which one would potentially feel powerless or out of control of their surroundings, he has some experience with that. So know that there are opportunities to find help even when it feels overwhelming that we can't change our surroundings. So, yes.
There's a lot of exercises we can do. I don't think beating yourself up falls in that classification.
So the point there was that there are a lot of exercises we can do. I don't think that beating yourself up falls into that classification. I agree. I don't think that beating yourself up carries the same sorts of benefits as beating up a punching bag might. So, yeah. Thank you. So in Paoli, Pennsylvania, in the 1980s, in a suburban hospital there, they realized that in certain in patients who have routine gallbladder surgery, some of them would recover really well, and some of them had these longer recoveries, and it led a researcher to investigate a little bit further. And they found that the patients, about half of the patients had windows that faced a brick wall, and the other half had a room with windows that faced this nice open courtyard with trees and nice surroundings. And they found that the patients who had the rooms that opened up to this courtyard had on average one less day in the hospital than those who were facing the brick wall. And in terms of hospital medicine, one less day in a hospital is a big deal, especially after something like the routine gallbladder surgery. So there's some clear connections that we found. I mean, not only intuitively, you can imagine how it might be helpful to be surrounded by nice, beautiful things, but also in terms of the research and the studies, it seems to bear out that physical surroundings really do matter. So along those lines too, green spaces and mortality, an in-depth review looking at tens of thousands of people and where they lived in relation to public green spaces found that they were less likely to be hospitalized, about 37% less likely to be hospitalized if they were in this group that lived closer to green spaces than the group that lived farthest from the green spaces. Yeah. Right. So the question was, were they able to control for variables of poverty, urban living? I'd have to pull that specific study and look at the methods to talk more. And if you want that reference, I'd be happy to give it to you at the end. We can look into that. But yeah, I think anytime that they're looking at surroundings and the way that they affect health, there's a lot of opportunity for some confounding variables, for other factors to affect the results there. Homelessness is another another way in which our surroundings can have a major impact. And then living space. So does the physical living space need some work? Is there room for improvement? Air quality. Yeah. Are there ways that you can either improve the quality of the air that you're exposed to, the quality of the air in your home? You need to change the air filter in your air handling system at home. Odors, how are those affecting your attitudes throughout the day? I know that I would be much grumpier if I were exposed to bad odors throughout my day. And some odors we know too can be calming. Can you use essential oils to create a more calm environment? Toxic and environmental exposure. So this is just a list essentially of different parts of your environment that you can consider within this category. Light pollution, noise pollution. And keep in mind that some of the remedies to this might not be too expensive. So some could be fairly expensive if it means moving to a new neighborhood. But some could be less expensive if it means adjusting the light in your home by getting some light, some completely occlusive or light blocking blinds, or using some essential oils to add a pleasant smell to a room can be relatively inexpensive. Or just simply putting a potted plant to bring some nature into your home could be relatively inexpensive. And know that in addition to bringing in positive stimuli, it's also helpful to remove negative stimuli. And so managing sensory overload, keeping your home safe is important as well. So not only limiting some things that can be problematic in terms of stimulation, but also avoiding things that could clutter your home and increase your risk of falls, for example. In the interest of time, I'll pass over that. I just want to highlight the environmental working group, which has a nice list of different potential environmental exposures and sources for those and things to look out for when you're shopping for foods, for example. So they've got a list of like the clean 15, the dirty dozen, which one's the 15 that, whether you buy organic or not doesn't really matter because the food isn't really affected by pesticides, versus the dirty dozen that you want to, if possible, buying those organic might actually be more beneficial. And other kind of tips and pointers like that from the environmental working group. So food and drink, nourishing and fueling. So some important eating styles that often come up when we talk about stuff like this. The Mediterranean diet is one, and we'll get into some of the details of this in a bit. A vegetarian diet, anti-inflammatory, a low glycemic index, the DASH diet, which is a diet low in sodium, especially designed for people who have high blood pressure. And then certain elimination diets that just remove certain categories of food. For example, for patients or people who have irritable bowel syndrome, removing this group of foods called FODMAPs. So the Mediterranean diet focuses on limiting red meat, dairy, and sugar, which in Wisconsin is sort of the opposite of what we usually do, or at least the opposite of the way that I was raised, growing up in Wisconsin. But there's good research to say that it's helpful for your brain. There's also good research to show that it decreases the risk of diabetes. So this study took a bunch of people who were at high risk for diabetes and found that they were 52% less likely to actually develop diabetes if they followed the Mediterranean diet, regardless of whether or not they restricted their calories, regardless of whether or not they lost weight, regardless of whether or not they changed their exercise. Just following these rules was beneficial. Similarly, it seemed to decrease the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So 30% reduction in having a heart attack, a stroke, or dying from heart disease. Nuts. So nuts can be a healthy part of the Mediterranean diet. One recommendation is to have 4 ounces of nuts 7 days a week. And just doing that alone has been found to have these benefits. So 20% reduction in death from all causes, 29% reduction in death from heart disease, 39% reduction in death from kidney disease. Just eating nuts. This study looks at some of the effects of red meat, and one of the concerns in red meat especially is the high saturated fat content, and so different red meats would fall into different categories here, but especially looking at the risk of red meat and its association with bowel cancers. Chocolate. This is one that finds its way into popular media often, because everybody likes to hear that chocolate might be good for them, or at least most people do. And so the idea of eating a quarter of a chocolate bar of true high cocoa content chocolate a day is known to reduce blood pressure. So nutrition pearls, eating a Mediterranean diet. So again, a diet that focuses mostly on plant-based foods with some fatty fish and some healthy oils. Eating a handful, not a canful, of nuts daily. Eating more fish than red meat, and when you do cook it, don't burn it. Eating the rainbow, so a variety of colored plants and foods, because the plants that have the most color often have the most antioxidants. And then eating 1/4% of a 70% cocoa chocolate bar daily. Keep in mind too that really the best healthy diet, when you look at that long list that we had before, is the one that you're going to follow. So the one that seems most appealing to you, the one that seems that you think you can stick to, is ultimately going to be the healthiest in the long run. Next, recharge, sleep and refresh. So we know that sleep is important. One study here looked at people who slept less than 5 hours and compared it to people who slept more than 7 hours. And they found that for those who slept less than 5 hours, or we'll talk about this in a positive way, for those who slept more than 7 hours, they were less likely to be obese, less likely to have high blood pressure, less likely to have diabetes. Thank you.
Can you go back to the last slide?
Yeah. All right, so rest and refresh. For those who slept 7 hours versus 5 hours. Here are the numbers. So how do we improve sleep? So light is important. And so is dark. If we look at this slide, we can see this little, the little yellow ball there is our biological clock. And you can see that it's hardwired to our eyes. It's also connected with our pineal gland in the back, which is what, yes, all right. So connected to our pineal gland, which releases melatonin, which is this hormone that regulates our circadian rhythm. And so you can see that when light strikes our eye, it sends a signal to our biological clock that it's daytime, which sends a signal to our pineal gland that says, don't make melatonin. So melatonin is this hormone that makes us want to sleep. But when our eyes are exposed to dark, our eye sends a signal to our biological clock and says, hey, it's nighttime. Make melatonin. And that induces all these sleep-related processes in our body. So how do we raise melatonin levels? Well, a few ways. So a good sleep-wake cycle, so regularly going to sleep at the same time, waking around the same time. Removing electromagnetic fields around your bed. So like limiting electronic devices, especially around the bed, can be helpful. Maintaining an ideal body weight. And if able, removing drugs that can affect melatonin or can lower melatonin. Beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, antipsychotics, antidepressants, anticonvulsants. Some of these are really important medications for the care of other medical conditions. And I would not recommend just stopping them. In fact, oftentimes controlling those other medications, those other conditions, is going to improve your sleep better than avoiding drugs. But I think when we can avoid drugs or intentionally look at our medication list and adjust things if needed to promote sleep, it can be useful. And then light therapy. Light therapy can be incredibly effective for not only sleep disorders, but things like seasonal affective disorder or depression. This just shows comparing, in treating depression actually, comparing a placebo to fluoxetine, which is an antidepressant. You can see the fluoxetine is better than the placebo. When you compare light, actually, just light therapy to the fluoxetine, light therapy does better. When you combine the two, it does even better. So what to look for in light therapy? Does anybody here use a therapy light? Especially in the winter? Yeah, a few? Okay, great. So ideally what you want to look for is a light box, a therapy light box that produces somewhere between 2,500 and 10,000 lux, and 10,000 lux would be ideal. And you want, if you're using a 10,000 lux box, you want about half an hour of exposure a day, and ideally in the morning, to help build that circadian rhythm. But also just to help stimulate our bodies in the same way that we normally would during the summer. There is also a mindfulness practice that can be specific for insomnia, and a type of therapy that's specific to insomnia. And there's some nice smartphone or tablet applications that can be helpful, or that can guide you through those processes, or complement what you might be working on with a therapist. Other ways to refresh and refuel. So besides sleep, there are other ways that we can recharge. Vacation, time with friends and family, volunteering, a day at the spa, time in nature, a good book, a good joke. Family, friends, and coworkers. Love and connection is incredibly important for our health. We are social beings, and we've really evolved to rely on a sort of social network for our own well-being. The literature, the studies seem to support that too. So in 10,000 men who were at high risk for heart disease, being able to say, yes, my wife shows me her love, was connected to 50% less angina, so that's chest pain related to heart disease, and 50% fewer ulcers. Similarly, in men and women, in 1,400 of them, who had a heart catheterization where they put the little wire through your blood vessels and look at your heart to open up clogged blood vessels. For those who were happily married, or for those who weren't happily married or didn't have a confidant, they had triple the 5-year mortality rate compared to those who didn't. So in addition to what really matters, that meaning and purpose that we talked about, there's the question of who really matters. And so this is one that can feel challenging to address if you feel like if it's an area for growth. Some ideas to consider. And know that this is one where I think it's often most helpful to approach it incrementally. So exploring opportunities for social support. Sometimes that can be working with a social worker to get connected with resources that can help build social connections. Sometimes it's connecting with support groups and peer-led groups. I mean, this is an excellent opportunity, this group here, for building your social network and building meaningful relationships. Compassion meditation is actually something that you can practice alone, but still build your social connection with other people. Being strategic about your care team, volunteering in the community, and considering animal-assisted therapy as well. Spirit and soul. There's a lot to talk about here, but we're limited on time. So I'll say that when you look at spirituality from an academic perspective, there are these 6 different aspects of spirituality. There's religious, humanistic, natural or nature spirituality, experiential, the cosmos, and mystery. And so for some people, spirituality can mean participating in a religious community. And for others, there are other ways to have a spiritual practice in a way that supports your health. In the interest of time, I'm going to jog rather than walk through the circle of health here. So humanistic spirituality focuses on developing a closeness and connection to humankind. You can start to see where there's some overlap too with some of the other circles within the circle here. Nature spirituality, spending time in nature, improving our connection with the environment can be beneficial. Experiential spirituality, knowing that our personal stories shape who we are and are a way for us to find meaning in life. And that can provide a spiritual element or spiritual connection. Cosmos spirituality. You ever look up at the stars and just feel in awe? That's a cosmos spirituality sort of experience. But that connection to not just the earth or humankind, or even necessarily a deity, but just to the greater universe. Mystery. There are just simply some things in life, in the world, in the universe that we can't explain and that we're never going to be able to explain. Just some of the ways here that spirituality can contribute to improved health. Different ways to explore spirituality, spirit and soul, as you're developing a personal health plan. So exploring your beliefs, and asking questions like, how might you develop your own spirituality? How is it related to your health? How does that connect to your sense of purpose? considering religious communities and or spiritual practices, connecting with a chaplain if you're in the hospital or a healthcare setting, identifying your spiritual anchors, working with forgiveness. And then power of the mind. So there is a long list of techniques that you can use to tap into the power of the mind. And I feel like oftentimes when I'm working with individuals in clinic, and I mention this, the last thing that I want to do is suggest that any of their symptoms or their experience is in their head or not real. I think my point with this is that our mind is a powerful tool, and even when our bodies are experiencing something painful or something unpleasant, there's an opportunity to use our mind as a way to cope or even to learn and grow from that experience. A lot of the power of the mind approaches focus on this idea that there's this relaxation response as a common denominator, a way that we can use our mind to trigger this natural relaxation response in our bodies. On this note too, we know that laughter is good for the heart, and there's a lot of interesting and entertaining research looking at laughter and its health benefits. I just want to take a step back and look at the circle of circles here, so that we can remind ourselves where we are on the circle of health. And then remember again these key points to self-care. So knowing that incremental change is most possible and the most sustainable. Setting SMART goals can be useful, so goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. We are all works in progress, and know that we always will be. And then taking a mindful, non-judgmental approach to supporting your health, it can be most useful. Thinking what matters to you, and not focusing on what's the matter with you.
So we're just going to wrap up very briefly with this professional care section, and then we'll leave a few minutes for questions. So as we branch out in the circle, we just went through all the self-care circles. Now we're branching out to the deep blue, right? This is professional care. And just very briefly to give a framework, as we talk about professional care in the context of integrative health, the NIH, or the National Institutes of Health, has a subdivision called the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. And they kind of divide these integrative therapies for which you might get professional care into three different areas. One is natural products, two is mind and body approaches, and three is systems of healing. So natural products, these are botanicals or herbal medicines, vitamins and supplements, probiotics. The one thing with this, and we're not going to explore this, this could be like a whole course in and of itself. One thing that I do want to highlight with natural products is it's important to recognize some precautions when you're choosing this. Where does it come from? What are the interactions with the current medications that you're taking? How effective is it? What does the research show? And what's the cost? So briefly, in the context of neurology, in the context of movement disorders, there are a couple. And this is just a hand-picking of three in particular. One is ashwagandha. So this is a East Indian herb that has been shown in mice models, so not in humans, but in mice models, to have neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory effects in mice with ALS. Interesting. Curcumin is another common one, or turmeric. Curcumin is kind of the active ingredient within the root turmeric. Shown to have anti-inflammatory properties. It also, interesting, modulates multiple cell signal pathways, and it also has been shown to prevent development of autoimmune neurologic conditions like MS or multiple sclerosis. Interesting. Interesting. The one thing, just to keep in mind, if you ever do think about using curcumin or turmeric, it's more bioavailable, it's more absorbed in our body if you have black pepper with it. Just a fun little tidbit. And the last one here is cannabinoids, right? And this one, cannabinoids is something that's becoming a lot more popular, a lot more people are talking about it. So this is when we talk about THC, or CBD, right? And so it's kind of components within marijuana. And so it's interesting, THC is considered this sort of psychoactive component of it. CBD is considered to have less or potentially no psychoactive effects. It was interesting because there's really not a lot of research on this yet. There is a lot coming through the pipeline, and we'll probably hear within the next 5 to 10 years a lot more about this. When I was just doing a brief search, it was interesting. It showed THC in particular has been shown to reduce pain and also decrease spasticity symptoms. Interesting. Again, these are things that I would potentially talk about in clinic. I wouldn't necessarily recommend at this point, just because there's not a lot of research behind it. Mind and body approaches, this is a lot. This is a big category. Briefly, I'll just mention Tai Chi, specifically when we're talking about movement disorders. So Tai Chi significantly reduced the risk of falling in people with Parkinson's disease. Right? So Tai Chi is a form of movement that has slow, sort of meditative postures that are part of it, that really trains our body's balance system. And acupuncture. Acupuncture is another big one within this mind and body therapies. And I mentioned this one. There is a significant volume of research with regard to acupuncture. This is something that I'm very interested in. This huge study of 20,000 patients, including 39 different individual trials, showed that acupuncture was superior to both sham and no acupuncture control for every pain condition that was looked at. And the conclusion was that we conclude that acupuncture is effective for the treatment of chronic pain, with treatment effects persisting over time. It's interesting. This is significant. And then finally, systems of healing. And so this is where you talk about not individual therapies, but from which all these therapies come. So for example, traditional Chinese medicine includes acupuncture, it includes diet, it includes Tai Chi. These therapies fall within a system. And each of these systems mentioned here have their own way of diagnosing, their own way of treating, their own way of prognosticating about how a person will be doing. And the final little piece here, that light blue circle, community. And it's just a simple quote here. Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. Yeah, Helen Keller. All of you, I believe, picked up a white piece of paper with some resources in our community at UW that will be supportive for you in many different ways as it relates to integrative health and integrative medicine. If you haven't picked one up, there should be some of the back still. Some really great resources in terms of in-person options, options online, some different books for people to read, some different phone applications that have been very helpful as well. So thank you. Thank you all for being here.